From a mob associate who exposed the crew that raised him to twin kingpins who helped bury the most powerful drug lord on earth, these 7 men traded loyalty for freedom and left entire criminal empires in ruins. Henry Hill. Before the movie, before Ray Liotta narrated his life onto every screen in America, Henry Hill was a half-Irish kid from Brooklyn who could never fully belong to the world he worshipped. His father came from Ireland and his mother from Sicily, and that mixed blood meant that no matter how much money he earned or how many rules he kept, the Lucchese family would never let him become a made man. What they would do was use him, and from the age of 11, Hill ran errands for Paul Vario, a capo who operated out of a cab stand across the street from where Hill grew up, drifting from small favors into arson, hijacking, and the kind of trust that only comes from a boy who refuses to talk when the police squeeze him. By his 20s, Hill had graduated into the crew's biggest scores. He walked out of the Air France cargo terminal at Kennedy Airport in 1967 with a suitcase holding more than $400,000, a theft so clean that nobody noticed the money was gone until the following Monday. He bought a restaurant, watched it fill up with wise guys, and stood close to the 2 men who defined his life, Vario, his mentor, and the hijacker Jimmy Burke, who took a shine to Hill the first night he met him. When Burke masterminded the 1978 Lufthansa heist, the largest cash robbery on American soil at that point, Hill sat at the edge of it, close enough to know everything and clean enough to survive the bloodbath that followed as Burke murdered his own crew to bury the trail. The drugs are what finished him. Hill built a wholesale pipeline, moving cocaine, heroin, and quaaludes out of prison connections, running his phone calls through a code so clumsy that federal agents wrote it down word for word. Golf clubs standing in for cash, dogs standing in for product. When they arrested him in 1980, Hill pieced together from a wiretap that Burke wanted him dead over the Lufthansa money and that Vario had signed off on it. And a man staring at his own murder makes decisions quickly. He signed with the government, and his testimony put roughly 50 people away, including both of the men who had made him. Here is where the legend needs a second look. 50 convictions is the number the record carries, and the damage to Vario's crew was real, but Hill never dismantled the Lucchese family. He was an associate testifying about the people directly around him, and the family absorbed the blow and kept moving. His enormous fame is a Martin Scorsese creation, built on Nicholas Pileggi's book and the film it became, and the film is not evidence of how much of an empire he actually brought down. Hill himself got thrown out of witness protection in 1987 for dealing cocaine in Seattle, kept getting arrested for the rest of his life, and died of heart disease in 2012 at 69, a good fella who wounded a crew and outlived almost everyone he betrayed. He at least waited until he was cornered to turn. The next man helped murder his own best friend long before a federal agent ever entered the room. Alpo Martinez. In the Harlem of the mid-1980s, Alberto Martinez was already a legend by the time most people learned his name. He started selling at 14 in East Harlem, and after he crossed paths with the West Side dealer Ozzie Fasson in 1985, he climbed until he stood among the biggest drug dealers in New York City, flashy and fearless in a way that made him a folk hero on the same blocks he was poisoning. When New York got too hot, he took his operation to Washington, D.C. in 1990, plugged straight into that city's underworld, and picked up a bodyguard, an enforcer named Wayne Silk Perry, one of the most feared triggermen the Capitol ever produced. The homie angle sits at the dead center of Alpo's story because the closest man to him was Rich Porter, his partner, his running mate, the third name in the Harlem Trinity that the streets still talk about. Federal agents arrested Alpo in D.C. in late 1991, and the charges they stacked on him were staggering: a drug conspiracy and 14 murders, including the killing of Rich Porter himself, the D.C. dealer Michael Salters, and a Brooklyn dealer named Demencio Benson. Staring down either a death sentence or life with no way out, Alpo did the one thing the myth of the loyal kingpin says a real one never does. He turned informant and testified against his own organization. His most consequential testimony landed on the man who had protected him. Alpo's cooperation against Wayne Perry helped send Perry away for 5 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole, and in exchange, Alpo took a 35-year sentence for a body count that would have buried anyone else forever. He walked out in 2015, dropped into witness protection in Lewiston, Maine, under the name Abraham Rodriguez, and lived a quiet life a long way from the streets that made him. That quiet did not last. On Halloween morning in 2021, someone pulled up on Alpo in Harlem and shot him 5 times as he sat in his truck, killing the man who had beaten a 14 murder case by talking. The person charged with it was later acquitted, and the detail that makes the whole thing land is this: investigators concluded the murder had nothing to do with snitching at all, that it grew out of a simmering feud over his reckless driving, a road rage killing dressed up by the internet as long-delayed justice. Weigh him honestly, and Alpo is the purest betrayal on this list. A man who helped bury his own partner and then sold out his own enforcer to save himself. What he did not do was wipe out an empire in any real sense. He collapsed his own Harlem and DC operation and took down his triggerman, while the reputation of a kingpin who leveled a dynasty is a gift from the film Paid in Full, not the case file. He built a legend on treachery, and in the end, he died for something as small and stupid as the way he drove. From Harlem's most infamous traitor, the countdown climbs to Harlem's most famous kingpin, the man who claimed he smuggled heroin into America inside the coffins of dead soldiers, Frank Lucchese. Frank Lucchese sold the best story in the history of the American drug trade, and separating the salesman from the trafficker is the whole challenge of his case. He came up from LaGrange, North Carolina to Harlem, and he told the world he spent 15 years as the driver and protege of the legendary gangster Bumpy Johnson, a claim that never quite held since Johnson was only free for about 5 of those years before he died, and Johnson's own widow said much of the life Lucchese described actually belonged to a different young hustler entirely. What Lucchese genuinely did was brilliant and brutal. He grasped that the Italian mafia's grip on New York heroin came from controlling the supply, so he flew to Bangkok, cut a direct partnership with a source in the Golden Triangle through his relative Ike Atkinson, and started importing products so pure he could brand it Blue Magic and sell it at 98 to 100% strength. And then came the line that built the myth. Lucchese claimed he shipped the heroin home hidden in the coffins of American servicemen killed in Vietnam, shrugging off the horror of it with a single sentence: "Who the hell is going to look in a dead soldier's coffin?" The problem is that Atkinson, the man who actually ran the shipments, always insisted the drugs moved inside hollowed out furniture, and no coffin was ever documented. The empire was real, even where the legend inflated. When a task force raided his house in Teaneck, New Jersey in 1975, they carried out more than $500,000 in cash, and the government convicted him on both federal and state charges and handed him a 70-year sentence. Facing that, Lucchese flipped, and his cooperation is credited with over 100 additional drug convictions, enough to earn him and his family a place in witness protection, and by 1981, a reduction of that 70-year term down to time served plus lifetime parole. Now weigh the snitch against the myth. Lucchese built a genuine heroin empire and genuinely informed on 100+ people, which counts for something real. And then, almost everything spectacular about his reputation collapses under scrutiny. The coffins are disputed, the Bumpy Johnson mentorship is doubted, and when the film American Gangster claimed his cooperation dismantled corrupt networks, a federal judge reviewing a lawsuit over that movie called the claim wholly inaccurate, stating flatly that Lucchese's cooperation did not lead to the convictions the ending bragged about. He was caught dealing again in 1984, served more time, and lived until 2019, dying at 88 after pleading guilty to a scheme as small as trying to cash a disability check twice. A long, sad coda for the man whose legend was bigger than his empire. Everyone so far worked their way up from the street. The next man sat at the very top of a New York crime family, and when he broke a barrier no boss in the country had ever crossed. Joseph Big Joey Massino. Joseph Massino spent his entire life building a fortress against the exact thing he eventually became. He rose through the Bonanno family as a truck hijacker turned protege of the old boss, Rusty Rastelli, proved himself in the blood of the 1981 murders that wiped out 3 rival captains, and took over as boss in 1991 with a paranoid genius for security that made him the most careful mob leader in America. He forbade his men from saying his name out loud, ordering them to touch an ear instead, which earned him the nickname The Ear. He shut down the social clubs, decentralized his crews so they couldn't inform on each other, and grew so contemptuous of the family's namesake that he renamed the whole operation the Massino family after himself. For a while, it worked perfectly. By the early 2000s, Massino was the only boss of New York's 5 families who was not sitting in a prison cell, and Time magazine crowned him the last Don. The murder that would haunt him traced back to the FBI agent Joe Pistone, who spent years undercover inside the Bonanos as Donnie Brasco, and when that infiltration was exposed, Massino ordered the death of the captain who had vouched for the agent, a killing he later described to his brother-in-law as squaring a debt. That brother-in-law is what undid him. The fortress cracked from the inside. One made man flipped, then another, and then his own underboss Salvatore Vitale, a man so close to Massino that he could narrate the boss's entire criminal history from memory, walked into the government's arms. Convicted in 2004 on 11 counts covering 7 murders and staring at a possible death sentence for one of them, Massino made history in the ugliest way available. He became the first boss of New York's 5 families to turn state's evidence. He then agreed to wear a wire into a jailhouse meeting with his own acting boss, Vincent Basciano, and recorded him admitting to a murder, a betrayal so total that it convicted the man running the family in his absence. Set against the giants of this list, Massino's rank is the highest and his impact is genuinely large, since that recording produced a real conviction and his cooperation confirmed decades of Bonanno history. What tempers the verdict is timing. The Bonanno family was already imploding before Massino spoke a single word, with 6 of his own made men, led by Vitali, having flipped on him first. His treason capped a collapse other men had started, which makes him the last domino to fall rather than the hand that pushed the first. He earned 2 life terms, got them cut to time served in 2013 for his cooperation, lived out his years as Ralph Rogers, and died in 2023 at 80. That's a boss who waited until the empire was already crumbling. The next man tore the roof off a crime family that thought it was untouchable, and he did it at the height of its power. Sammy the Bull Gravano. Sammy Gravano is the standard every other name on this list gets measured against, because he did not merely inform on a crime family, he decapitated one. He climbed the Gambino ranks to underboss, admitted to a role in 19 murders along the way, and in December 1985, he sat in a car across from Sparks Steakhouse during the Christmas rush, watching a team of shooters dressed in matching white trench coats and black fur hats, and it was Gravano who spotted Castellano's car turning the corner and called the ambush in over a walkie-talkie. The boss and his driver were cut down on the crowded Manhattan sidewalk. Gotti rode the car slowly past the take in the scene, and by the time that night was over, Gravano had helped murder the head of his own family and put John Gotti on the throne. Gravano was no figurehead in that world. He genuinely ran the concrete and construction rackets, and his own description of that power was blunt. I literally controlled Manhattan. Literally. His fall came from Gotti's own mouth. The FBI had wired the Ravenite Social Club, and when the tapes played back, Gravano heard the boss. He had helped the Crown running him down, calling him too greedy, and laying the groundwork to pin a string of murders on his underboss. A man who has killed for the family and then hears the family planning to sacrifice him reaches a cold conclusion fast, and in 1991, Gravano became the highest-ranking member of the 5 families ever to break the blood oath at that point. What his testimony did next is the reason he ranks this high. Gravano took the stand and sent Gotti, the Teflon Don, the boss no prosecutor had ever made a charge stick to life in prison without parole in 1992 alongside his consigliere. He implicated 29 mobsters and became only the second confessed underboss in the history of the American Mafia to break the highest-ranking man of his moment to do it. Federal authorities credited his cooperation with 37 convictions, more men left awaiting trial, and a wave of union officials resigning rather than face what he knew. In exchange, he received 5 years, walked out early because he had already served 4, and slipped into witness protection in Colorado before restlessly leaving it for Arizona under the name Jimmy Moran. Judged purely on how much of a criminal empire one informant destroyed, Gravano is decisive without an asterisk. He ended the untouchable reign of the most famous mobster in America and gutted the Gambino leadership in a single trial. The only reason he isn't higher is scale, because he broke a mafia family in one city, and the last 2 names on this list broke transnational cartels. His own second act stained the redemption anyway. He built a massive ecstasy operation in Arizona, got arrested in 2000, drew a 20-year sentence, and didn't come home until 2017, later reinventing himself yet again as a YouTuber, narrating the life he once lived in silence. For all the bodies and all the headlines, though, the American Mafia was a neighborhood business next to what was waiting in Colombia, and the man who gutted the Medellin cartel's American pipeline wasn't Colombian at all. Max Mermelstein. Max Mermelstein is the name almost nobody outside law enforcement knows, which is strange because the government considered him the most valuable drug informant in the country's history. He was a Brooklyn-born mechanical engineer who drifted into hotel work in Puerto Rico and the Bahamas, married a Colombian woman, and stumbled into the orbit of the Medellin cartel through her circle of friends. The moment that trapped him is impossible to forget. On Christmas morning in 1978, a cartel enforcer named Rafael Cardona Salazar shot a man to death in front of him, then turned to Mermelstein and told him plainly, "You work for me now." From that terror grew an operation of astonishing scale. Mermelstein ran the cartel's logistics inside the United States, arranging the flights, locating the drop points, scheduling the deliveries that flooded the country with cocaine, and he became so trusted that he was the only American ever permitted to sit in on the Medellin leadership's high councils, breaking bread with Pablo Escobar, the Ochoa brothers, Carlos Leder, and Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha. The cartel trusted him enough to hand him the job of supervising the contract murder of the informant Barry Seal, and over the years, he moved an estimated 56 tons of cocaine into America, worth billions. Then federal agents arrested him near his Florida home in 1985, and the whole edifice reversed. With the cartel refusing to post his bail and a long sentence hanging over him, Mermelstein flipped, and what he gave the government was the inner machinery of the most powerful drug organization on earth. His cooperation drove indictments against Escobar himself, against Fabio Ochoa, and against the enforcer who had trapped him. It put him on the witness stand against Carlos Leder and into a deposition against the Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega. A $3 million contract went out on his head, and the government agreed to an unprecedented relocation of his extended family. 16 relatives moved into the program together in the largest single arrangement in its history at that time. In return for handing over the cartel's inner workings, he served barely 2 years, walked out early by order of a judge who said openly that he wanted to send a message straight to Medellin. The verdict on Mermelstein is as clean as it gets, decisive and larger than anything the mafia names on this list ever touched. A United States attorney called him the single most valuable government witness in drug matters the country had ever known, and the description fit because he didn't inform on a crew or a family. He handed prosecutors the operating blueprint of the Medellin cartel's entire American distribution network. He lived out his years under the name Wes Barkley and died of cancer in 2008 at 65, an ordinary-looking engineer who did more damage to a cartel than a decade of task forces. And yet, even Medellin would be eclipsed on this list, because the men at number one were twins from Chicago who started behind a fast food counter and finished by recording the most wanted man on the planet. The Flores twins. Pedro and Margarito Flores earned the top of this list because the empire they helped to bring down is the biggest empire any informant in America has ever surrendered. The identical twins from Little Village in Chicago tell their own origin story with a straight face. They went from flipping burgers behind a McDonald's counter to becoming the trusted top customers of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and the Sinaloa cartel, running what prosecutors called the biggest drug dealing operation in Chicago history, moving cocaine by the ton straight from the mountaintop of the most powerful cartel on earth. They ran it like the franchise they had come up in, taking everything they learned behind that counter about surges in demand and absorbing the loss as a cost of business and applying it to a supply chain that reached from Sinaloa to the corners of Chicago, and it made them the trusted American face of El Chapo's product. What separates the Flores twins from almost everyone else on this list is what came after the betrayal. Margarito now runs a program he calls Kingpin to Educator, holding seminars for law enforcement on how the cartels actually move their product, speaking at universities and juvenile detention centers, and telling anyone who will listen that he has sat with members of Congress on the questions of cartel influence and border safety. He frames the whole reinvention through a religious conversion and told a federal judge, "I felt true freedom when I gave my life to Jesus Christ." And in the strangest turn of all, the twins have publicly forgiven Saul Rodriguez, the man who kidnapped Pedro and collected a fortune in cocaine for his release, and are now backing his own bid to get out of prison early. Margarito describes that forgiveness as a slow process rooted in accountability rather than a single moment of grace. And he says he wants to fold Rodriguez into the same programs he runs, turning 2 lives built on destruction into a warning for everyone tempted to follow them. 2 men who helped cage the most wanted criminal alive have decided the man who wronged them personally deserves a second chance. The blood oath, the code of the streets, the promise that the man beside you would rather die than talk. 7 times, it turned out to be worth exactly 1 plea deal. And the men who kept that promise, the Godas and the Escobars and the El Chapos, are the ones who died in cells or are dying in them now, undone by the homies who looked them in the eye and chose themselves.